Hey there and welcome back to another Disney video. And today I'm wading into the swamp and I'm going to try to pin down which princess movie from the Walt Disney Film Library is better, Tangled or Frozen. And this is an age-old debate, and by age-old, like, a couple of years old. This sort of discussion's really started to crop up quite a lot in the last couple of years, now the dust is well and truly settled after their respective releases, and we've had time to stew on them both. And I suppose, before we can get down to the major points of comparison, we should go through some basics for both of the films. Released in 2010, Tangled is a retelling of the classic fairy tale Rapunzel, where in this tale, the young princess is kidnapped away from her parents as a child by an evil witch, after a magic life-giving flower was used to heal her as a baby. This in turn gives her magical hair that would rejuvenate anything when a special song is sung. And so, to keep it all to herself, Mother Gothel locks her away in a remote tower for years, never letting her leave and telling her that the world would try to harm her for her powers. However, despite this, she yearns for adventure and something more out of life. And so, when the dashing rogue Flynn Rider hides in her tower after a grand heist, her worldview begins to crumble to dust and she discovers her true identity as the princess of the realm. And of course, she falls in love with the guy along the way. And then this culminates with her mother dying, falling out the window of the tower. All's well that ends well. And yeah, it did fairly well for itself, both from a critical and commercial point of view, with an 89% critical approval rating from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, and an 87% audience score from over 100,000 reviews. It got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song, it got nominated for some Golden Globes, some Annie Awards. All in all, it was fairly well received. Nothing earth-shattering, but very well liked. And on top of that, it did well at the box office for the most part. It grossed $594 million off a budget of $250 million. My god, that's a big budget. For reference, Frozen cost $100 million less than this. But yeah, then there's Frozen, which is a take on the fairy tale, The Snow Queen. It tells the story of two princesses, Elsa and Anna, and their struggles after the death of their parents. Elsa, who was born with magical ice powers, hides away from the world and her sister until forced to come into the light for her coronation as queen. Anna falls in love with the prince, and it turns out he's a crazy murderer later on, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, an incident in the coronation makes Elsa flee into the mountains, and the kingdom of Arendelle is plunged into eternal winter. But then, through the power of sisterly love, Anna's able to assist Elsa to master her powers, and also gets a new love interest along the way to replace evil Hans. For those that have seen it, you'll know that this is a very bare-bones synopsis, but that's the best you're going to be getting today. And yeah, this was also extremely successful, and honestly it became a pop culture phenomenon. Like I said, it had a budget of $150 million, and it ended up grossing $1.2 billion, becoming the highest grossing animated film of all time, and holding on to that record for 6 years until the Lion King remake released, which still holds the title today. And realistically, it's going to hold on to that title for quite some time to come. So yeah, it's fair to say that this film had a lot of reach, and on top of that, it was well received. It won Oscars, Golden Globes, a BAFTA, Annie Awards. It did very well in that regard. And then on top of that, it has a 90% critical score and an 85% audience score, based off over 250,000 reviews. This thing was a box office smash and a cultural phenomenon. And so it's clear that of our two films here, Frozen's the one that did the best in pretty much every single category possible. It surpassed Tangled's financials, reviews, accolades. It comes out on top. And so if you use that as your metric for success, it's clear that Frozen is the better film. But is that the case? I'm not quite so sure. Obviously everything is subjective when it comes to these sort of things, but I do think you can make a couple of points of comparison when deciding what's better. And before we go any further, I will acknowledge now, Tangled is my movie. I love this film so much. But I also recognize that Frozen is a near unparalleled cinematic breakthrough for the animation industry in terms of scope and reach. And so yeah, that's where my thoughts are at currently. I just wanted to acknowledge my bias before I wade into the swamp any further. And so yeah, I'm not necessarily sure I'll be able to convince you that Tangled's just straight up better than Frozen. Hell, I'm not sure that if you break it down completely to the base elements, that that's even a realistic thing to argue. I think for me, and for a lot of other people, Tangled's simply preferable. Whereas perhaps Frozen is the technically better film, if that makes sense. But for me, I think it's more that Tangled deserves a bit higher praise all round, in that it should be held up as a contemporary to Frozen, a sort of almost equal, or at least in the same sort of conversation. That's all I'm asking, because I truly think it is. In terms of visuals, both of these films are honestly knockouts. For the time, they were well received and truly marvels of the screen, blending CGI animation with traditional 2D animation in a way that had never really been done before. They both made huge strides for the studio. The snow and environments for Frozen and the ice. My god, the ice. And for Tangled, that enchanting storybook quality of the backgrounds and the environments, but then also Rapunzel's hair. The hair looks so good and realistic, especially for the time. And honestly, from my layman's perspective, I do struggle to see how Tangled's really any worse from a technology point of view. Like, in fact, I think it actually straight up looks better to me. And yeah, I guess this really does boil down to preferences on aesthetic, but I just prefer the warmer, more fantastical visuals of Tangled. Feels like it comes right out of a story. And then there's the fun contrast between the forest, the meadows, the town, the desert canyon, and then the Outlaw's Bar. There's so much visual variety which makes it more exciting to watch. Frozen has that too, but it's also just a lot of snow. It's quite dark and grim a lot of the time, which is fine, and they do change it up sometimes, but it can get a little bit samey, I suppose. And that's fine, like I said, but I do enjoy a bit of variety in my animated films is all. And this brings me to the soundtrack, because, visuals and songs. This is Disney's bread and butter. No doubt about it, Frozen's soundtrack slaps. Probably one of the best overall Disney soundtracks since The Lion King. I don't think you can deny this. People might hate a bunch of the songs now simply from oversaturation, but it's absurd to deny their impact and popularity. And honestly, it's absurd to argue that you've always hated them anyway. They got popular for a reason. They became overplayed for a reason. They're genuinely good songs. So yeah, I'm not going to foolishly try to convince you that Frozen has a bad score or anything like that. Simply that Tangled has a slightly underrated one. It's true. I mean, Tangled doesn't quite have the wealth of hits that Frozen does because my god, Frozen really is Aladdin 2.0. Every song on the track is a hit. And no, Tangled really can't compete with that. But on the other hand, I do think that whilst Tangled might not have the same success or epic grandeur, its more low-key soundtrack actually has a whole lot of charm. Perhaps a bit more heart and emotion. And I don't know what it is, but it just has this really heartfelt quality to it. Whereas to me, Frozen's songs are clearly chart toppers and designed to be that. They don't have that same feel. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just, it's just how I'm feeling. And also, At Last I See the Light, that's the definitive romance song. Robbed, I tell you. It should have won the Oscar. And I won't hear a word otherwise. And so for me, no song in Frozen really comes close to the beauty of that. Or that scene with the lanterns. Oh my god, the scene with the lanterns. That's one of the best all-time Disney moments, both from a visual and audio perspective. What I do think that Frozen should be praised above for Tangled is its redefining of the role of the princess. Even in Tangled, ultimately, while she's the main character, Rapunzel is kind of secondary. It's Flynn who's the hero. His arc is saving the princess and getting the girl. I mean, it's dressed up a bit better than it was in the old days, and he gets more screen time and development instead of just swooping in at the last second, but ultimately that's still what happens. Frozen, it does an interesting twist. The two sisters, the princesses, they're the main characters, the center of everything. They're at times the protagonist, the villain. I mean, Elsa is pretty much the villain of the story's middle arc. The damsel in distress. Anna saves the helpless Elsa. They do the twist where you think true love's kiss is going to save Anna from freezing. Only it doesn't. And then they frame things as the princess not needing a hunky romantic prince. So instead, she gets with the hunky romantic peasant instead. Woo! So yeah, Frozen does things a whole lot better in my eyes if we're talking about being a bit more progressive. And I think that's really where Frozen does start to pull away a whole lot more. It's further along in the development of the narrative, in more progressive values that we've seen more and more as Disney's kept releasing films. It breaks down tropes and laughs at how ridiculous a lot of them are, and indeed, how ridiculous Disney films can be, even though at times it still upholds certain tropes, but that's a different video. Ultimately, the narrative design and execution of Frozen is to me what holds it up as the gold standard going forward, because it pushed the boundaries and it broke new ground in a way that other films hadn't, instead of harkening back to the old classic style with a shiny fresh new coat of paint and a few adjustments. And so really, I think that's probably the reason why Frozen's endured for the last decade or so as this titan, because in addition to looking good and sounding good, the story was fresh. And that's something I think that Tangled does struggle with quite a lot. So Tangled is a great film, perhaps not Frozen level, but it comes damn close, and it deserves more love. But at the same time, I don't think it's better than Frozen. It comes close, but it's not it. But it still is worthy of praise nonetheless. And so with all that being said, I'll just remind you that these are only my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. Which do you think's better? Frozen? Tangled? Why do you think that? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.